Welcome to Pond. My name is Mitch Stein. I'm the co-founder, CEO, and Chief Impact Officer. We want to make tech work for good. So we're highlighting and uplifting the critical parts of the impact technology ecosystem through human conversations with the leaders and shapers of the industry. Let's jump in.
Meet Gabe Cooper, a career technologist that's always had a passion for giving. And now he's leading the charge to turn donations from transactions into relationships with responsive fundraising software.
Well, Gabe, thank you so much for joining us and for being a provider on Pond. Would you mind quickly introducing yourself and your company?
Yeah, so Gabe Cooper, I'm the founder of Virtuous software. So Virtuous is a CRM, but we're more than just a CRM. We call ourselves a responsive fundraising platform. So we have a bunch of marketing tools and fundraising tools that help nonprofits build more personal relationships with their donors.
Awesome. I find with every founder of an impact business that there's always a great story.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to hear, with all the options out there to be a technologist, what really drew you to work in this space?
Yeah, it's a good question. I used to work for nonprofits. Like I sat in the seat of a lot of the folks that we now serve. And so kind of cut my teeth doing that, but then spent probably 12 years actually consulting for nonprofits. So we were building technology solutions for nonprofits. And what we saw was a bunch of teams that desperately wanted to create good in the world, right? They were passionate about their mission, but they really struggled in fundraising. And it seemed to us that they didn't struggle too much with the major donors. What they did was they struggled with communicating with everyday donors in a meaningful way. And a lot of times it was because they were handcuffed to technology that just wouldn't do a job for them, right? And it was just really harder than it should have been. And so I think seeing that for a long time did a couple of things. It created a lot of empathy for me and our team for the nonprofits that we serve. But it also sort of lit this fire around generosity when we started realizing, man, these organizations could do far more if people were just a little bit more generous. And we realized that like generosity does something in the heart of the giver, right? So we live in a pretty sort of polarized world. I don't know if you guys have looked at the news lately, but it's a little rough out there. People can be selfish sometimes, but it's when we give away our time, talent, our social capital, our money, something happens in us to where we become a little bit more others focused, which we think is a really good thing. So I think those are the two big parts of my story that have really formed why we founded Virtuous to begin with. And just, we love working with these amazing nonprofits.
When you think about the decision to go start that company, it's never a point in time decision. But I guess from the early days, when you think about your vision and what you wanted to change and go do versus where you are today, what's been the biggest change in your approach, your goals, your strategy versus where you started?
Probably a couple of things, but a big one was originally we thought the nonprofits we served wanted to choose from a variety of best in breed software, right? We thought they wanted to pick the best in breed email, pick the best in breed donation platform, pick the best in breed CRM, and bring those together. What we found over time is that a lot of nonprofits don't have time to choose from multiple vendors. They don't want to manage multiple vendor relationships. They don't have always the technical expertise to be able to integrate a bunch of disparate tools. And so what we found over time is if we can bring some of those tools together under one roof, as long as they're best in class, as long as they're great tools, that nonprofits would rather have a single platform where you get one holistic view of a donor and you can take action. And so that's probably been the biggest change. The other one is we've moved up market over time. So we really are serving what we would call the mid-market of the nonprofit space. Most of our customers sit between 2 million on the low end and 100 million on the high end of donation revenue. And we found that those nonprofits typically have a little bit more complex enterprise needs, and we love working to serve those kind of organizations.
And obviously, target market is a differentiator in terms of your product suite, but maybe dive in a little bit more on what differentiates you as a company. I don't think it's obvious to everybody that CRM it's like a massively competitive space. And I have yet to come across someone that can name every CRM option for nonprofits. So
Yeah.
actually a two-part question. Number one, why do you think there are so many options? And then within that pool, what do you think sets Virtuous apart?
Yeah, it is a pretty fragmented space, right? There are a lot of options out there, and there are some folks doing some really good things. Honestly, I'm friends with some of the founders that we compete with, and it's more of a frenemy thing. We really like some of the people in our space. But yeah, I think a lot of people have tried to solve the problem, but I think part of the issue is um, I won't sort of name the legacy leader in our space, but I think a lot of the attempts in our space have been sort of let's do what they do, but do it online, right? And I think what makes Virtuous different is we don't fundamentally believe that the problem is just clunky software or whether it works on the internet. We think the fundamental problem is actually building personal relationships with donors at scale. And so by that, I mean, like every brand experience you have today in 2021 is hyper personalized to you. Like if you're running using a Strava app, it's telling you what other people are doing in your neighborhood. If you jump on Instagram, it's showing you exactly the kind of clothes it thinks you should buy. I mean, every Disney, Patagonia, they're all giving you hyper personalized brand experiences. Nonprofits haven't crossed this chasm yet. They're still using sort of 1950s spray and pray methodology where everybody gets the same piece of mail. Everybody gets the same email every month. And it's based on the nonprofit's timing, not the timing of the donor. So that's a long way of saying really what differentiates us is we're more than just a CRM. It's really data analytics using big data combined with marketing automation to allow nonprofits to build very personal connections with donors on multiple channels without increasing the size of their team, right? So really all of our platform is built around that idea that we call responsive fundraising.
All right. And thinking about that competitive landscape is one challenge of working in this space. There's obviously a number. Is there a specific cause that you're super passionate about or event or something that you really hold on to that on the days when you're like, why do I do this job? Kind of bring you back down and center you in the work?
Yeah, there's some industry stuff and some particular causes, but there's as much as conferences kind of drive me crazy, there's something super energizing around being people that are sort of in it with you, right? Whether it's the organizations that we serve or even other vendors in our space. So there's like one of my favorites is Next After has a conference called NIO, Nonprofit Innovation Optimization Summit. In10 is a great one. There's several through the year that are just energizing to be around people that think the way you think. But my favorite cause right now is an organization called Care for Children. So they do adoption and foster care, China, Thailand, and Vietnam. So most of those countries haven't traditionally had good foster care and adoption programs. Most kids just go to an orphanage. And so that organization works with the governments of those countries to place kids in forever homes. And so that's right now, that's my like go-to organization. I love what they do.
I know you mentioned previously about volunteering as a component of your company culture and in your life. What do you feel like is unique about your culture that you seek in candidates or instill in folks once they join, realizing it's somewhat of a balance of the two when it comes to culture?
Yeah, so we say everybody on our team has to lean in and love the organizations we serve. So we actually find a lot of success hiring people out of the nonprofit industry. So a lot of our team used to sit in the seats of our customers. And so we love that because there's built-in empathy. We also create that through our Virtuous Volunteers program, where everybody on our team has to spend 2 hours a month on company time volunteering at nonprofits. And so we want to be shoulder to shoulder with the organizations we serve. That's a big differentiator for culture for us. The other thing that we always say, and you'll hear it around our office, is we say that we take our work very seriously. We don't take ourselves very seriously. And so nobody on our team thinks they're a big deal. Everybody's super collaborative. Like where our animated GIF game is on fleek, as the kids say. Our Slack channels are filled with the funniest things you'll ever see, and so it's a super fun, funny team. But when we get to work, and we do it with excellence.
Yeah, I love that. And your first example of volunteering in the community, I just saw something actually on the Kelly Clarkson show of all places. with Dan Price, the CEO of Gravity Payments, and there was a story about, all their customers were small businesses that relied on in-person foot traffic, and they serve point of sale, payments services. They're like pandemic disaster. And there was all these amazing stories about how their salespeople were like helping that customer set up like Shopify for the first time, to set up to like, basically their outsourced e-commerce strategy person, just completely for free, just to make sure they could still be collecting payments, right? So it's helping the business, but like so above and beyond. And there was one person that even like helped set up this restaurant's like online ordering, but then also served a couple shifts as their delivery person for free. Like just like crazy over. And it's like so extreme that I think a lot of businesses would be like, oh, we have to draw the line somewhere. But it's almost like, could you just let it be a little crazy and see what happens? Hey, you get free press that people see on the Kelly Clarkson show.
Yes. Well, free press, but do you get a team who's just so committed and on fire, right? I mean, if your team is doing crazy stuff like that, like number one, everybody's going to want to work for you because that's nuts. But now everybody in your team isn't just showing up because it's a job. They're showing it up because they're passionate and they love what they do. So I don't know, stuff like that is a win all around for me.
Yeah. I mean, they even talked about shortly thereafter, they basically were like, we are going to have to let a certain number of people go. And the entire company, unprompted, started pledging pay cuts.
Crazy.
So
that's
to
awesome.
be able to keep people at the company, and people will be like, I don't have any kids and my spouse works, so I'm going to take no salary for the next 3 months. And then,
awesome.
And then the business did so well that they were able to then ultimately like pay everybody back as the business rebounded and not have to lay anybody off in the meantime. It's really cool company. And changing topics slightly, but although I know this is core to your own company culture, donor centricity, I realize is a passion area of yours. When people like say someone wrote the book on it, you literally did write the book on donor centricity. I guess quickly, without spoiling the whole book for everybody that should go out and buy it and read it, what do you feel like is the biggest takeaway, and what is the most common misconception for someone looking at that book and maybe not having read it, but judging it on the cover?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of what, like, we love the sort of donor-centric movement. Our book is responsive fundraising. And part of the reason that we say responsive fundraising and not donor-centric is sometimes that term can be a little bit loaded or or debated within our space. And so we wanted to avoid the open debate a little bit, but just really focus on the idea that people give based on a relationship, and they give based on what they care about personally. I mean, I always tell people, look, think about the last 5 times you gave to a charity. I guarantee you 4 of the 5 times you knew somebody that worked there, or it's a cause that impacted you very, very directly, like you gave to cancer research because somebody in your family had cancer, or is something that impacted your local community. I mean, we give where we feel a very personal connection. Right. And so at minimum, nonprofits have to realize that unless they can create that kind of personal connection, unless they can lean in and listen to donors, figure out what the donors care about and meet them where they're at to draw them in, they're never going to be truly effective. Like on the major donor side, I think we've got this right for years, right? Major donor reps know this. When they meet with somebody, they listen to them, they find out the names of their kids, they find out what they're passionate about. But I think as nonprofits, the more we can connect relationally in a meaningful way, and you call it donor centricity, call it whatever you want, but it's really creating a personal connection. The more we can drive giving, and particularly the more we can drive retention, right? It's how to move somebody from like a one-time tipper to an organization to sort of a committed activist and long-time giver. And it's really about that personal relationship. So yeah, I just don't think in 2021 you can truly scale fundraising without leaning in hard on listening to your donors.
Yeah, and I like the terminology difference that distinguishing that is important, because donor centricity sounds like an end goal as opposed to responsive fundraising as a practice.
Yes.
Because I sort of think donor centricity in my mind is a bit of a means to an end, right? It's like we're centering the donor so we can like scoot them into this our world so they can be cause centric. It's like be donor centric so that person can be cause centric, which is how they become a recurring donor, to your point.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, I think the bravest fundraisers that I know, and I know this can get a little controversial too, but one of the best fundraisers I know will meet with somebody, get to know them, realize that their passions of that donor aren't aligned with that organization. And they'll flat out say, I'm so excited about your passions. Let me introduce you to this organization, this totally different organization where you can give, where your passions lined up. And he'll literally introduce people to other organizations. But he's freakishly effective because he actually takes time to care and listen to people, right? And so I think the more we can just work on figuring out what the passions of people are, lining up those passions with where we're going as an organization, the better we're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's an amazing marketing concept to lift up too, right? Where like you think about email marketing campaigns, you don't want to be vanilla. You don't want to be okay to everybody, right? You are getting narrowing in on your audience. If you're pink sherbet, you want to find the pink sherbet lovers and don't waste your time pandering to the Rocky Road people. And I think that can span, so I mean, that's like product development, that's marketing, that's like hiring, right?
Yes.
So that transcends everything. But it's really easy when you're begging someone for money to do it on their terms and think, I need this money, so I have to solve this right now. So that person you mentioned who's able to like rise above that one situation, right? To say, I'm going to put a stake in the ground around what we do. And by the way, by making that really clear, I bet that donor they referred somewhere else referred just as many donors that were in his friend group to that organization.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely. I bet you that person told 10 different people about just because of that experience. And it was so cool. And the other thing is, like, Americans only give 2.5% of GDP away to nonprofits. That's a really big pie, right? And it could be, the 2.5 could be so much bigger. So to your point, like, there's plenty of pink sherbet people out there that just aren't giving just because you haven't connected with them in a personal way, right? So find who they are, connect with them personally, draw them into your cause, and don't try to be all things to all people, and try to build a real connection.
Yeah, I love the what you mentioned about putting out there who you are. I think that's just like a personal way of life, right? Like
Yes.
putting yourself out there as an organization, as a person, you're going to draw in the people that you want, and like if you're putting out something else, you're going to draw in those people. And like, are those, the donors, it's a dance, right? You don't want to say like our way or the highway. So either, especially if so many nonprofits are like pretty progressive causes. And so if you're just like, you're on board with, I can't think of a good example, like something really extreme, or else like, don't talk to us, find the middle ground where you can call people in and make some like comfortable middle ground and sort of walk them to, the outcome that is best because you're closest to those lived experience with the problem you're solving.
Yeah. Well, the example that I always use, Noah on our team uses this too, which is like a child sponsorship organization. Like, even within that, it's pretty narrow focus, but you have people that sponsor a kid because they have kids and they want to connect their kid with a kid, or they've never had kids and this is their proxy for sort of experiencing what's it's like, or they're a grandparent, right? That sort of wants to reclaim that connection, or they just care about global poverty and they feel like child sponsorship is a great way to alleviate global poverty. Like, unless you can figure out what somebody cares about. So there's 5 different kinds of people that have very different visions of your cause, but they can still be on the same team together. You have to understand who they are, what they care about, connect with them where they're at, and draw them in. That doesn't mean you compromise who you are, but it means you understand why people give.
Yeah, and I think actually that's a sign of having more self-awareness as a person or an organization, when you're able to engage in that kind of dance with different people and map yourself to them without sacrificing who you are, but showing that kind of flexibility and dexterity of how broadly applicable your cause is.
Yeah, dexterity is a great way to put it. And it's not compromising your mission at all, but it's meeting people where they're at.
It's being expansive, I would say, in how you define things in order, like we said, to bring people along to where you want to go. The meeting people, I know you've mentioned this, and I say this a bunch too, meeting people where they're at. Like, it's a bit of a buzzword. I could see that coming across as a cop-out because it's sort of a non-plan. It's like a non-strategy because it's so specific to individual people. How do you see people effectively actualize tactically meeting donors where they're at?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you something freakishly tactical, and this is probably too far down in the weeds, but when you get a first-time donor, so one of the biggest problems nonprofits face is 76% of people will give a single gift and never give again. So donor retention sort of stinks, right? So one of the quickest ways you can fix that is through a new donor welcome series that you just send them a series of communications on multiple channels, text, email, mail, a phone call that welcomes them, is incredibly grateful. You're transparent about the work you're doing. But the trick is if you can figure out why they came, like what pages on your site were they visiting? Did they come to an event with a friend? Like, how did they find out about you? And you can tailor those messages in a new donor welcome series based on how they came to you. Then that's effectively a way of meeting with them where they're at. It's like, oh, you came with Bob to this event. You must love Bob, and I'd love to hear what you thought of our event. It's like, that's the first message. And then you're carrying on with 2 or 3 other messages after that. So that's at least acknowledging, I know who you are, you're seen, like, I know how you got here, how can I serve you, right? It's a super basic way that you can completely move the needle on retention dramatically just by being smart enough to understand where somebody came from, right? It's not rocket science, but super helpful. And that sort of thinking can be applied across the board to a bunch of other initiatives as well.
I love that. The reason I love that the most, Gabe, is you can literally start that with a binary and expand infinitely. So you can be like, this person is here for the animal shelter, or they're here for like pet adoption or something, like put them one of 2 buckets and just start with like 2 tracks.
Totally.
And then see how that goes. Did you get the right 2 buckets? Should one of them be split in 2? And I think that's a big problem. As someone that helps nonprofits evaluate tech all day, it is the ocean that is the problem, right? It is the quantity of stuff to do that all seems out of reach or like they don't have time for. Even with any one product, even like Virtuous, like you said, it's so powerful. So much of this tech is so powerful. There's so much you could do with it. And so breaking it down into, I love that example because it's like, here's one thing you can do next month, right? It's like, let's make it really tangible and then really easy to grow from there. You don't leave that behind and move on to something else you're adding.
Yeah. And I love, like, I'll tell nonprofits because it feels like boiling the ocean. And so I always say, look, find 3 personas. So by that, I mean, like, who are the 3 types of donors that give to you? You have the college age activist that never gives you dime but tweets like crazy. You have the stay-at-home mom that watches every video you've ever put out. And then you have 3 buckets, basically. Try to like organize folks in those buckets. Now say, what are the 3 stories or pieces of content we have that person absolutely needs to see? Okay, great. Now you have at least 3 content pieces that you can deliver to 3 different people. And I guarantee you that's an afternoon's worth of work to map that out. It's not rocket science, but at least you're not boiling the ocean. Now you're knowing, oh, I just got a new Sharon who's a college student that's on Twitter all the time. I know that at least in the first couple of months, she's going to get these 3 things, right? It's like, okay, that's doable as opposed to overcomplicating it and boiling the ocean.
I'd add to that, to make it even simpler, I think sometimes creating personas can be intimidating because you're like, okay, so yes, they use Twitter, but like maybe also use Facebook, but then they also, and they're like, you kind of get wrapped up in the definition of it all. You could even say like, pick a donor. You don't even have to invent anything. Just pick one person and that's your persona. Like don't, cut the workload for yourself. Pick a younger person, a middle-aged person, an older person. And maybe one of them is a male and one is a woman and one's a parent, and like try to get some diversity, but just pick literal people.
That's a great idea. I love that insight. Yeah, that shortcuts it so much. We tell people that give them a name. And in that case, you can literally give them the donor's name, right? And so you just who they are. And you're like, does somebody look kind of like them? Okay, then they're in that bucket.
And then, by the way, I mean, I don't know, this may be against like normal marketing protocol, but I feel like so much of marketing is like tying yourself in knots to figure out what someone wants and how they want to behave without asking them. So by picking a specific person, you can literally call that person and you can give them a gift card or like some way to thank them, but just say, can we spend 20 minutes? And I would just love to ask like how you've interacted with our cause. Like, what channels do you see us most on? What do you like seeing? What would you like to see more? Like, that's kind of radical to just say, like, stop twisting yourself in knots. Just ask them.
Yes. Oh, gosh, I love that. Well, I mean, we always tell the orgs we work with, you should survey your donors at least a quarter, like peel off 20% of them and survey them, and don't ask them for money. Don't have some weird thing. You just like literally, like, what do you know about us? What do you care about? Like, what gets you fired up? And you're just trying to figure out who they are, and you listen like crazy, but pick up the phone. The best organizations that we work with, people on their program team call donors monthly, and they're not even asking for money. They're just like, hey, what questions do you have? How'd you find out about us? How can we serve you better? Right.
Yeah.
And it's just that, and it's super simple. It's not like some sophisticated weird marketing thing. It's just literally asking.
Yeah, I mean, the best marketing tactics, the best growth are all just doing their best to map to how humans actually interact. So it's like, if you've got a good friend, you don't call them every day asking them to come over and fix something, right? You just develop a friendship with them because they're a friend. And then when you need something, you ask and you try to make it worth their while somehow, like buy pizza or you buy the beer. And it's just like, don't overcomplicate it. Just think, if this is a person I wanted to get to know, what would you do?
Yes.
So that there's a balance, because especially at a larger organization, you need to come up with processes and administer something like that. But I feel like spending the time to administer processes to be more human is like the best way you could spend your time at a scaled organization.
Absolutely.
I feel like we've touched on this a couple different ways, but and I realize this is controversial, which is why I kind of want to talk about it some more, but donor centricity. And this might be the reason it's controversial, but in your mind, if someone's not donor centric, what do they tend to be blank centric? Realizing the world is not binaries, but like, what is the problem when they're not donor centric enough typically?
Yeah. And so removing some of the baggage off that donor centricity term, because there is baggage, and I think it's maybe been used the wrong way, and which is why we'll use the term some, but not a ton.
Right.
But I think one of the easiest key indicators is look at the last few communications that you sent out, and if 80% of the communication is talking about you, it's completely institution focused and how awesome we are, like, that's probably not the right approach. Like, the donor doesn't care about you. You're a proxy to help them create good in the world. So the best organizations, like WotC is an organization that does really good with this. They almost remove themselves and they bring the donor right into the cause. So you feel like you're right there making an impact, and they're happy to go in the background and get out of the way. So if you pull up your last email or your last appeal and it's like, you say your organization's name 12 times and how great we are, and you never use the word like you in talking about the donor or your impact, like, you're probably missing the mark, right? It has to be about the donor and their impact in the world, and how you're helping them create that, and what they're able to create in the world through your organization. Does that make sense?
No, I love that. And I'm just real time thinking about how effectively responsive fundraising, donor centricity, what's really getting at is like getting yourself out of your own way to
Yes.
like let the donor sit right with their impact.
Yeah,
But
you don't want the donor to drive your mission, right? You don't want to go to donor and say, what should we be doing? Or like pandering. You have a point of view. You're accomplishing great things in the world, but like you need to invite them in a meaningful way, and you need to make them feel empowered, like it's them that's making a difference, because without them you don't exist. And so it's a balance, but it's critical. The one other thing too I'll add here is the way you do this, I think most effectively at a lot of nonprofits, is actually removing silos between organizational departments. A bunch of nonprofits see fundraising as a necessary evil to do the real work of the cause instead of part and parcel to the cause itself. And so the more that there's not a wall between fundraising and program. Like my wife used to work at a homeless shelter, and like the fundraising and administration staff sat on this side of campus, and the people actually doing the casework with the hurting people were over here, and they didn't cross the parking lot very often, right? And so like that creates a weird dichotomy where you're creating this additional like layer of weirdness between the donor and the good they're creating in the world. The more you can get those teams collaborating and get the donor really close, the better you're going to pull this off.
And I think that's become evident to people in the past year during the pandemic, where if you had been doing a good job of that, you realized how important that was, because now your fundraisers are hurting because they don't have the connection with the cause that they used to. And I've heard that from a bunch of leaders in the space who are more focused on fundraising or just leadership in general, where like they do this work because it fills their cup. Like the impact is what drives them. And now you've actually put them in the same position as a donor, completely removed, reliant upon communication, language, video, images, storytelling to drive their connection to the cause. And I just think that's reinforces your point about the organization shouldn't be siloed and that was much connected, but you realize like also don't silo the donor. Now you've experienced the donor's perspective, so bring them in too.
Totally agree. It's not trivial. It's a hard thing to do, but man, the more we can do that, I think people are going to be loyal forever, right? Because now they're part of it with you. They're not talking about you, the organization, they're talking about us as if they're a part of it, right? And that's where the game changer happens.
Yeah, that line is tough, where it's us, and yet I don't need to control what you're doing. Because I think part of the other negative components of donor centricity, and why it can carry a negative connotation, is you're used to people thinking I'm wealthy, and so I have a valid opinion on how something should be done in this organization. And so I don't know the answer to that of like how you walk that line.
But you have to be brave enough to say no, right? I mean, being donor centric doesn't mean rolling over or straying from your mission. You have to be brave in those conversations. You have to listen and respect people, but you have to be courageous and have enough belief in what you're doing to say, this is where we're going. We would love you to be in it with us, like really in it, shoulder to shoulder, but we're marching in this direction. So, right. And so and I know that's why donor centricity sort of gets a bad rap, and rightfully so in that case, but I still think it requires relationship building. I just don't think the opposite would be not being donor centric, which to me means just talking about yourself all the time and not really caring what your donors think or building a relationship, which is just really hard to raise money that way.
Spot on. I know we've talked a lot about crossover lessons, marketing to how you do donor engagement and that sort of stuff. Can you think of 2 lessons from having feet in both worlds of tech and nonprofit like one nonprofit practice that you see done really well that you wish more tech companies would adopt, and vice versa? What's something that you love that you've seen at tech startups that you wish more nonprofits would really embrace?
On the nonprofit side, and I think the best for-profit brands are starting to get this, is that um, money is a helpful scorecard and driver, but what you do during the day is so much more than money. And so nonprofits get this. They know that if their team members feel meaning and purpose, like they're part of something bigger than themselves and they're making a dent in the universe. Like, and nonprofits, the best ones, do a great job of communicating to their team all the time the impact that we're having together. This is great. And then people will stick around and they will like die for that cause, right? The Whole Foods and Patagonias and some of these brands are starting to get that, right? The best not-for-profits start to get that. But I think for-profits need to grow a lot in this area, not just corporate social responsibility, but really understanding their impact in the world, communicating that to employees and getting everybody lined up behind that mission. So that's the one thing nonprofits can teach for-profits. Going the other way, on the for-profit world, if you don't make your customers happy every day, you go out of business. Like if Nike sells me a bad pair of shoes, I'm never buying Nikes again, and they have a real bad year, right? Mm-hmm. Nonprofits don't face that same sort of market pressure, so they don't move fast for that reason, because a lot of times they don't have to. And so the one thing to create urgency that I wish nonprofits would do is actually adopt like tech startup mentality. So there's a book called The Lean Startup that I always give to nonprofits. I'm like, read this book. Like, don't try to boil the ocean or come up with a 3-year strategic plan. Literally start working in 2-week sprints, meaning come up with an idea right now and figure out how you can test whether it works or not in the next 2 weeks. Don't spend 20 grand doing it. Find the easiest way to test whether it works, learn from it, embrace failure. You're going to fail and fall on your face a lot. That's okay. You're doing it fast and not spending very much money on it. Just use it's a lot of times it's called agile principles, or lean startup principles. But I'll literally make nonprofits like read that literature from the tech startup community and say, do this. And it makes all the difference in the world, because all of a sudden you're fast, nimble, goal-oriented, and you can move, which is great.
That's a lesson I wish I would have understood more when I got started with the startup. Mm-hmm. So I think that's valid in so many ways. And I also think breaking things down into smaller problems is just a valid strategy for anybody. I would also just spend a little bit more time on the concept of urgency, because I do think that is another loaded term where it cuts both ways of like, who is this urgent for? Mm-hmm. And for me, the guiding principle that I think is helpful around urgency is like, impact is urgent.
Yes.
And most other things are not. So like, think about where can you give yourself grace to not pressure yourself? And where can you lean in because of the impact? And so I love that concept of like, I've identified this one problem that I want to tackle over this 2-week time, and it's urgent for me to spend my focus there. That does not mean I need to spend 20 hours a day on it. It's not urgent for my overall time. Yes. And I just think that balance of urgency, I think, can turn off a lot of people to the work.
Yeah, because everything always feels like it's on fire at a lot of nonprofits, and some of it is on fire and some of it's not. So it's how to stack rank and prioritize it. But honestly, I think part of that comes back to what I said before, which is embracing and celebrating failure. I think part of the stress of nonprofits, whether you're a major donor person or working in program, is you feel pressure from donors, you feel institutional pressure to not screw up. And it's really hard to live under that. And so I think great nonprofits, they admit failure and then they learn, right? And so if you try a new crazy idea and it blows up, I have a buddy, he literally would buy people on his team a cake if they were brave enough to try something and failed, and they would celebrate the failure with a cake because they learned something, right? And it's just a picture of And all of a sudden now the sort of the weight of urgency goes away. Things are still urgent, but sort of the fear of failure and the emotional baggage that comes with it starts to lift, where it's like, this might not work, but we'll learn something. It'll be crazy. It's better to act than not act, right? And so,
Right.
but that's hard to do, but I think the organizations that do it really flourish.
Well, there's no concept of upside.
Yes, that's true.
And so that is what you're missing, where the incentive to try and fail in so many places comes with upside.
Mhm.
And I don't know that we've really solved for like impact upside. It's not how people are compensated. It's certainly not how they're evaluated. When you have an annual evaluation, that is how you raise grant funding the next year and a year in and year out. It's really tough to be like, yeah, we want to make a bunch of mistakes this year. Can you imagine telling
I know.
a nonprofit telling their board that? But that's what they should be saying.
That's what they should be saying. I think there's Dan Plott. I don't know if you've seen his TED Talk, but he talks a lot about this. And so the ideas get a little bit controversial, but gosh, I just wish we would do more of it, right? To say, hey, we're even going to spend money. We're going to throw the program versus fundraising spend out the window for a quarter, and we're going to place some big bets, and some of them may fail. And the
Yeah.
upside is impact, because we didn't get in this just to pitter along and sort of make a small dent in the cause. We came here to make a difference, and so we're going to take some swings. And you need to get
Yeah.
your board and your leadership lined up around that. And I know that's more sort of high growth tech startup thinking, but I think we could use a little bit more of that, where we're going to have to retrain board members and retrain our donors to where we're going to be brave and swing for the fences, because these are big problems we're tackling. So I'm not saying it's not hard. Look, I've worked in nonprofits as a hard sell, but gosh, I wish we had a little bit more of it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a place that I just hope something like Pond can help catalyze, because I just look at it and say like, okay, that is a problem. It is hard. Let's break it down into what those barriers are, right?
Mhm.
The barriers are that costs money,
Yes.
biggest one. I have no time,
Yeah.
right? I don't have the expertise to even go about thinking what tech or tools I want to deploy or things I want to try. And so, and number 4 is trust. I don't trust any of these people call me all the time. They spam email me all the time. I don't want to get involved with them. And so if we can start to like systematically lower some of those barriers, where it's like, hey, you can have a way to spend time that's safe, that you kind of trust it, to engage with people, to brainstorm. Hey, you're gonna also have some money. So that conversation around money with your boss, your board, the budget was a little easier. So now you're like lining up incentives to be like, okay, yeah, I can take that risk, and it's not as much of a risk.
Yeah.
Obviously these are small steps, but I just hope that could even, if we can say something that's a little bit, might sound unusual, but like if we could be the anti-charity water for the sector. And what I mean by that is like, no shade to Charity Water, who has raised an unbelievable amount of money for an unbelievable and important cause. But I think some of the after effects of establishing a bar for people, that my donation is about me getting 100% gratification, that 100% of my dollars are giving someone water, without acknowledging all the steps along the way that are involved. You set an unrealistic expectation for every other organization, for every other important cause. And so can we make tech investment and infrastructure and strategy like sexy for a nonprofit to spend money on? Could we even like start to harness funds around that in the same way that Charity Water did, to help fundraise, like literally because they need to buy this tech tool, which is the last thing a nonprofit would ever talk to a donor about.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But I think it'd just be kind of fun.
I think it'd be great. And caveat, I love Charity Water. I actually had Victoria Harrison speak at our last conference. Amazing org. But I have another friend that runs in some of the same circles as Charity Water. Last week, he sent an email to his donors, an organization called Rescue Freedom. They do human trafficking rescue. And his email literally said, hey, historically, we've told you that 100% of your dollars go to the cause. And that's because we had some major donors offsetting our operations. we don't feel like that was fair to tell you that, because to accomplish what we want to accomplish in the world, we got to be transparent and tell you that it actually takes like infrastructure and a long-term view to do this. So we're not going to tell you anymore that 100%. It's not that we could continue to tell you that, but we'd rather be transparent and say, like, this is how the sausage is made. This is where we're going. We want you transparently in it with us. And like that, I emailed them, like, that was a brave email to send, but I kind of wish more people would do that. Just like, this is where we're going, and just be super transparent about it.
Yeah, I mean, transparency in my mind is just 100% always the answer. It's just like one definitive litmus test that we can all agree upon as the right way to do things. But for me, the biggest problem, especially getting down to a grassroots level, nonprofits are definitionally local. They're, they're human, they're individual, they're community-based, they're organic. That's where problems exist, and why we have such a complex, diverse nonprofit ecosystem to solve these gaps in society. So you've set a really unrealistic expectation for folks on the ground in a grassroots context. It's like, oh yeah, all you have to do is just like have a few rich friends that'll cover your operations so that you can have this amazing marketing story to tell. And that person's going to look at you and be like,
Yes.
So I love that folks in that position with the luxury of having that kind of backing are able to change their own narrative to the benefit of the broader sector. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
For you and we didn't even talk much about your broader background and how long you've been kind of working with and spending time on technology for the sector, but someone who's been trying to make changes in tech for 20 years and how it serves nonprofits, and I know that's an uphill battle through mud at times. What is one thing that you haven't seen be solved, an outstanding issue that you just wish you could wave a magic wand and change about nonprofit tech?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one for us really is the moving to personalization. The example I always give, because it's a very true example, is I get emails from Nordstrom every day, and it'll be a 40-something-year-old guy with a salt and pepper beard wearing a shirt that I can't live without, and I will click on it every single time because I can't not, right? Because it's hyper relevant to me. Nordstrom somehow magically knows exactly who I am and exactly what I'm going to buy. Like that, we should turn that on its head for good. Like I always tell people that have seen The Social Dilemma, they'll ask me as a tech person, like, is that movie true? Do social media platforms really do this? They're like, yes, absolutely. I'm like, actually, my company does a little bit of that. But the idea is you turn that on its head for good. Like, how do you create that personalized experience for good, driving people to do better in the world, right? And so I don't think we've cracked that nut as the nonprofit space. I think we're getting better, but I think we're a long way off from that. My experience that I had with Nordstrom, or my experience that I had with my Strava app this morning. So I want desperately to solve that one. There's other ones too, like we haven't done a good job with sort of what I call consumer facing giving experiences, where somebody can have a Shopify experience where their payment wallet follows them to every site they're on, so they don't have to type in their information every single time. Or
Right.
suggestion engines that can pop up causes you should give to on Facebook based on things that you're looking at, right? Like those consumer facing engines that drive that personal experience. We haven't done that either, which are even harder, but if somebody can crack that nut, that'd be amazing.
With those aspirational goals in mind for the sector, thinking about yourself and Virtuous as a company, two separate entities, which I know can probably be hard to disentangle a lot of times. What is your own personal biggest 5-year goal and biggest 5-year goal for the company?
Yeah, I mean, they're so entangled at this point. I don't know that I can really say. Yeah, so for me personally, yeah, I mean, I'm passionate about generosity. Like I think as Americans, we should be giving more than 420 billion a year away. We should be giving 800 billion a year away. And I would love to see that change no matter what I'm doing. Personally with COVID, I got on this like endurance fitness kick. And so I'm doing like a half Ironman later this year, and I keep ramping up my self torture. So a lot of my personal goals have nothing to do with philanthropy. They're more around how much can I hurt myself. Um, but yeah, so those are the personal goals. And then for Virtuous, it really is just this: how are we fulfilling the promise of responsive fundraising? Like, can we help organizations improve retention, average gift, donor care, and draw people into their cause in very personal ways to grow generosity, right? And we're not going to be content until we see that happen, until we're creating big amounts of net new generosity. In fact, in the next 18 months, we have sort of this goal to prove that we've created $1 billion in net new generosity in the world that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And so it's like sort of the BHAG that my team is after right now, which is a lot of fun.
As a college rower, I'm very familiar with self-flatulation as a form of fitness.
Rowing was the worst. Oh my gosh, that's like a torture device.
Oh yeah. We had one day, there was a tradition, I don't know why it needed to be a tradition, where the seniors would row. I went to University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and we'd have one day where the seniors would do a like day long, as many miles as you could row as an 8. So we rode like 71 miles in a day. It took like 11 hours.
Oh,
and every year, everybody always tried to add a mile to it so they could beat the year before.
Why?
Yeah, it's a good, why is a good question for most of the training stuff we did. But I guess before we go, especially since this is the first time we've been able to chat too, I'd just be curious if, I know I've been interviewing you this whole time. Did you have any questions for me before we sign off here?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear you talk about your 5-year vision for Pond. Like where do you want to be? Where are you going?
Like, how deep do you want to get into my scary brain? No, it's funny when you brought up the current behavior of social media as an aspiration for nonprofits. Because I would hold out how the opportunity for nonprofits to ask donors, be human centric and not so data centric around how they bucket people, is actually what should be aspirational. And that still requires good tech. I'm not saying that's like a manual, it shouldn't be a manual thing.
I agree with both things.
And so I would actually flip the script on how you described like Nordstrom and whatever other, Instagram knowing about you. Our goal for Pond is to subvert the attention economy for good. What I mean by that is we're starting with how nonprofits shop for technology as a demonstration of how much of a disservice the attention economy does to achieving good and impact in the world. So these mechanisms for nonprofits to connect with you as a provider all assumes that they need someone else to tell them what they need. They need Google to tell them what they need. They need their Instagram feed. They need, paid sponsorship spots to tell them what they need. And no one is literally saying, what do you need? Like empowering them, trusting them to give voice to their own problem and their own need. And I think us closing that loop in a really simple way, like Pond is not some crazy advanced technology. It's just not. It is literally like, here you can share what you are looking for. And the innovation and the work we're doing is in connection. It's like, I was an investment banker and a fundraiser. Like how I did that was just like constantly like a crazy amount of energy trying to meet everybody I could and connecting people and connecting dots. And I think that's what we bring and surface in this one tiny example about how nonprofits find technology. But what that starts to unveil for the world is like, oh yeah, that does sound like a better way to shop. I could save time and get paid. And you're like, well, wait, by Google and Facebook profiting off of how I use their tools, without ever giving me any benefit and extracting billions of dollars from the economy to provide that benefit, to build insane levels of data infrastructure around my every move as a person to learn every single thing about me without ever just asking me what I wanted.
Yeah.
Is that the best use of technology? So, you know, I don't know what the exact timeline is. I don't know how that grows, but, you know, we start with SaaS tools for nonprofits, but already you have, you know, nonprofits being like, well, can we use this to find, you know, certain services? Yeah, that makes this a logical next step. And then you've got vendors on our platform saying, hey, we're a startup looking for an email marketing tool. Would we be able to have a listing and have email marketing providers reach out to us? And you're like, well, yeah, of course you could. And you're like, okay, well, I'm just a small business and I'm looking for like a payroll platform and I don't want to go through all these crap reviews on G2 and Capterra. Can I just say, yeah, of course you could. So you're like, play that forward a bunch. You know what the number one thing so far that nonprofit members are asking for from our site? Do you have actually? I would love if you. What do you think the number one thing is from using the site so far? Is their number one feature addition that they're asking for?
I don't know. Email. I have no idea.
Talking to each other.
Really? That's crazy.
And
I get it during COVID, especially. I get it.
And what you realize is like, okay, they want to find other folks like them or that do things they're interested in to hear what they think about their tools or their organization or their impact and share with them and connect. What does that start to sound like?
What does it sound like?
Social media.
Yeah, with enough people on there. Yeah.
And so then you're like, okay, so it's a social media platform where you can bring out all the good stuff about Facebook, but there's no ads and it pays you to use it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So like
that is a big vision.
It is, but it is, period. But I think it's so fascinating to me to think about being able to accomplish those kinds of things with the grounding in we're literally doing this for good. We're doing this for nonprofits, and then just showing everyone else that that's the better way to do things. And you know, I don't have a specific timeline around that. We'll learn more and put a finer point on it. But I think I hesitate a bit to bring up saying like we're starting with nonprofits and then like moving on, because that's not the intention at all. I actually think the keys to success at every step of that way, also to not piss people off and alienate people, is we're continually centering the good and the impact we're achieving. Because you just, and I even think about right now, our business model is for every $20 in revenue we make, a nonprofit earns $100. I can't think of a single corollary.
That's awesome.
Business like that that exists, right? So all of a sudden, it's like, who could get mad at that? And yet you see what we're at from a business like tech perspective, what we're demonstrating is really powerful. So I think I actually don't think we could accomplish that without being a nonprofit impact focused business.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And just like in our attention economy and where attention and reach has been the focus for everybody for so long, it's really started to reach saturation. You begin to see like relationship and trust become the things that people are looking for now. Like, who do I trust and do I have real relationships? That becomes the most important sort of driver of everything. And so how do you swing back toward creating authentic relationships that are based in trust? And it's like, it's where I think we're going. So I love that you guys are right at the center of it.
And it's about humanity, really, in my view, of like, there's a lot of focus in product development on the functional problem you're solving. And I would encourage anybody that's creating product to actually first think about the emotional problem you can help solve, because we got a lot of emotional damage that society and technology has caused for everybody. And I
Yes.
actually think unwinding some of that is the key to success for in the future for any product development. Is not thinking what is the functional problem I can solve with the least amount of collateral emotional damage, which is how
Yeah.
it feels like a lot of products in the last 20 years have been developed. To start with, how do I solve the emotional problem, and then tack on like the functional things that could be improved. But really appreciated you spending so much time, more than you
Oh,
bargained
it's
for,
great.
with us today.
It's awesome. I love it.
Thank you again. It was really fun catching up, and hope to talk to you soon. Thanks,
Yeah.
Gabe.
Thanks so much, Mitch. We'll talk
Take
soon.
care.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for coming by. Be sure to visit joinpond.com and jump in when you're ready.